Hello and welcome to my channel, where I'll be telling you all kinds of strange stories ranging from true crime to some much less believable, although just as fascinating, tales. For today's video we have the unsolved Austin yogurt shop murders. Listen in and see what you think. Sarah Harbison, 15, and her 13-year-old friend Amy Ayers were hanging out at North Cross Mall in Austin, Texas on the 6th of December 1991. They were passing time on a cold Friday night until Sarah's sister Jennifer and her school friend and co-worker Eliza Thomas, both 17, finished their late shift at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt store in the Hillside Strip Mall on West Anderson Lane. Sarah and Amy walked the few streets from the mall to the yogurt store to help shut it down at about 10 p.m. All four girls had planned to attend a slumber party after the shop closed at 11 p.m. While out on patrol just before midnight, Austin Police Department Officer Troy Gay observed flames billowing from the strip mall. The police called in the fire and firemen came quickly. They found a horrifying scene while extinguishing the fire. Jennifer, Sarah, Amy and Eliza had all died. The young women were all nude, tied and gagged with their own clothes. Amy's corpse was located in the middle of the back room, while Jennifer, Sarah and Eliza were discovered in the rear of the back room, packed into one corner. Eliza and Sarah were piled on top of each other, and Jennifer was nearby. Their corpses were virtually unrecognizable, as the murderer or murderers had gathered napkins and other combustible objects from around the store and doused them and the victims with lighter fluid before setting fire to the store and escaping. Autopsies on the girls revealed that they were all killed execution style, shot in the back of the skull. Furthermore, at least 2 of the young women had been raped. Authorities also told the media that 2 firearms were used in the killings, implying that at least 2 people were involved. The yogurt shop's management and police detectives discovered that just $540 was gone. Despite a long police investigation led by lead investigator John Jones and his colleague Mike Huckabee, many suspects and a community incensed, these heinous crimes remain unsolved. What are the theories regarding the Austin yogurt shop murders? Well, the inquiry had a lot of problems from the outset. First and foremost, the firefighters who responded to the call performed their jobs admirably, but perhaps wiped away valuable forensic evidence in the process. Furthermore, Austin lacked forensic competence in the early 1990s, with just 1 fingerprint unit. On top of this, due to the limited number of the city's homicide squad, only 1 homicide detective was on duty the night of the killings. Regardless of the department's deficiencies, Jones and Huckabee had their fair share of suspects. The police station's phones were ringing off the hook as tips poured in. When faced with 342 suspects and scores of fake confessions, the detectives were understandably overwhelmed. Given the hideous nature of the murders and the staging of the corpses, detectives initially looked into serial killers who may have been active in the area, and this led them to Kenneth Allen McDuff. McDuff was a serial killer in Texas who was accused of at least 14 killings. On the 6th of August 1966, he was convicted of the murders of 3 teenagers, Robert Brand, Mark Dunman and Edna Lewis Sullivan. Macduff was condemned to death, but his sentence was commuted to life in prison with the possibility of release when the United States Supreme Court abolished capital punishment in a 5-4 ruling in 1972. Macduff was paroled in 1989 due to prison overpopulation, and he is now suspected to have committed many more killings following his parole, including the 1992 murder of Melissa Ann Northrup, a 22-year-old Texan. Macduff was apprehended and sentenced to death after avoiding arrest for years. Macduff confessed to the yogurt store killings on the 17th of November 1998, the day before his execution. He was wrong if he believed his last-minute confession would save his life. His execution was carried out on the appointed day. Following Macduff's death, police examined his confession more closely, but ruled him out when fingerprints and hair from the yogurt store could not be connected to him. Detectives also received a tip 8 days after the killings to check into a youngster named Maurice Pierce. The 16-year-old was spotted with a pistol at North Cross Mall on the same night Sarah and Amy were there before heading to the yogurt store. The pistol was a .22 caliber handgun, the same caliber as one of the weapons used in the girls' executions. When Jones and Huckabee questioned Pierce and his 3 mall companions, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen and Forrest Wellborn, nothing came of the lead. The ballistics of Pierce's gun did not match the murder weapon when it was examined. Furthermore, just as with Macduff, the fingerprints and hair recovered from the murder site did not match any of the 4 teenagers. The investigators eventually had to move on. After years with no arrests, the investigation was turned over to new detectives. Then, in 1999, 4 suspects in their 20s were arrested for the murders. Forrest Wellborn, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen and Maurice Pierce, the same individuals who were questioned 8 days after the girls were murdered and released due to a lack of evidence. Michael Scott, one of the accused, admitted to the murders, and he wasn't alone. Robert Springsteen admitted to murdering the girls and raping one of them. Following the confessions, the authorities were sure they had found their assailants. The 4 had intended to just rob the yogurt store, according to the hypothesis. Scott, Springsteen and Pierce entered the store, while Wellborn stood outside as a guard. The heist, however, went horribly wrong, and all of the young women inside were murdered. Authorities attempted to accuse Wellborn twice for the killings, but there was insufficient evidence to connect him to the crime. Thus, all accusations against him were withdrawn. Charges against Pierce were also dropped owing to a lack of evidence, which was especially difficult for the police and victims' families to accept, given that he was thought to be the mastermind behind the crime and subsequent murders. Springsteen and Scott were prosecuted separately for the murders at the yogurt store, and both were convicted, found guilty of capital murder. Springsteen got the death penalty, which was feasible even after the Supreme Court decision from 1972, because the state of Texas had enacted a new death penalty law. And Michael Scott received a 99-year jail term. However, not long after their convictions, significant doubts were raised that Springsteen and Scott were actually guilty and could really be innocent. To begin with, neither of them had any tangible proof connecting them to the crime. Furthermore, both men claimed that their admissions were forced, and there was evidence to support these allegations. One of the investigation's detectives was moved on after allegedly extorting confessions in an unrelated case. A picture emerged of another Austin Police Department officer aiming a pistol at Scott's head during his questioning. Both convictions were overturned about 15 years after the yogurt store murders, when the courts determined they violated Springsteen and Scott's Sixth Amendment right to confront their accuser. The admissions of Scott and Springsteen were used against each other at trial, but their attorneys were never given the chance to cross-examine the accuser. As a consequence, their constitutional rights were found to have been infringed. Later, in 2008, DNA testing was performed on the evidence gathered from the crime site, and the male DNA discovered did not match Scott or Springsteen, or any of the other individuals accused of the murder through the years. Even though she was certain Scott and Springsteen were guilty of the yogurt store murder, then Travis County District Attorney Rosemary Lemberg stated the men would not be re-prosecuted until the unknown man linked to the DNA evidence was discovered. The majority of officials continue to think they had the correct 4 men all along, and that a 5th man must have assisted in the crime, explaining away the unknown DNA evidence. However, Scott and Springsteen's defense lawyers dismissed the 5th guy hypothesis, emphasizing that no one ever suggested a 5th participant until the inconvenient DNA findings came in. Some attorneys, investigators, family members, and armchair detectives who have researched this case believe the murderers are 2 unnamed customers who were in the yogurt store at closing time. Police reportedly questioned 52 customers who visited the shop on the day of the killings, but 2 individuals who witnesses said were present at closing time were never located. 3 customers who exited the shop just before closing claimed they saw 2 guys sat at a table who did not seem to be going any time soon. After all of the other diners had gone, the 2 guys at the booth stayed. Witnesses described the suspects as follows. One has lighter hair, maybe like a dirty blonde, and is around 5'6". He was in his late 20s or early 30s. The other is said to be a larger guy. Both were dressed in heavier coats. One wore an army fatigue-style jacket, while the other wore a black jacket. Neither of these men has ever been identified to this day. Finally, it's debatable if robbery was ever really the motivation in this case. Given the tiny amount of money stolen and the high degree of violence, it's difficult to believe that these deaths were just the consequence of a botched robbery. It is much more probable that the crime was sexually motivated, and the money was an afterthought. Regardless, it seems unlikely that Springsteen, Pierce, Wellborn and Scott had any involvement in the killings. The key to solving this case may lie in connecting the DNA evidence discovered at the site to the 2 male customers observed by witnesses lingering in the yogurt store after it had closed. So who do you believe is to blame for the killings at the Austin yogurt shop? The killings at the yogurt shop in 1991 permanently altered Austin's landscape. The killings were dubbed the incident when Austin lost its innocence by the city's then mayor. Residents questioned the safety of their community after the brutal and unexpected deaths of 4 young girls with their whole lives ahead of them. The I Can't Believe It's Yogurt store was eventually converted into a nail salon, but a plaque honouring Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Amy Ayers and Eliza Thomas remains in the parking lot under an ancient oak tree. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed the content, click the subscribe and like buttons so you can receive more content like this strange story every week. See you next time.